Welcome everyone to State of Search 2024. This is our September edition. Tonight we're going to have Jesse McDonald on. But first, before we get to him, just as a reminder, we do have the State of Search conference coming up next month. Tickets are on sale, and I will give y'all a little teaser. September 29th is my birthday, so you may want to check your email for a discount code for that. Jesse, let's get into Jesse. Jesse's been a senior director at Siege Media. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay. Lives in Austin, Texas, with just over 10 years of experience.
Mhm.
Previously was a global SEO strategist for IBM, which I'm assuming has to be exciting and fun with all the things that can happen and go wrong for a massive company. Hey, Tim, welcome to the chat. Um, Jesse, I'm just going to let you take it over, let you get going, and I'll pop up questions. So they will pop up and show like this at the bottom. So do you see the
All right.
Tim's message?
I do, but I'm going to be in a different tab, so I won't see them. So if you just want to call them out to me, feel free. Totally cool.
Okay, awesome. Sounds good.
Perfecto. All right. Well, hello everyone. Thank you. Thank you for having me and joining me this evening. My name is Jesse McDonald, and today I'm going to be talking to you a bit about performing and standardizing technical SEO audits, which is something I've been working on really in depth in my time at Siege Media so far. So a little bit about me. Yes, name's Jesse McDonald. I've been a SEO for a little over 10 years now. You can follow me on any social media platform at Jesse SEO Geek. So yes, currently senior SEO director at Siege Media. I've been with the company since April. Previously, I was over at IBM for about 5 years, and then worked at a couple of different agencies for the first 5 years of my decade-long career. Over that time, I've served as a judge at the U.S. and Search Awards and Global Marketing Awards between 2018 and 2022. I had a kiddo at the very beginning of pandemic, and that has limited my my available time outside of work. So not doing as much judging as I used to, but maybe soon as she's getting a little bit older. I was listed at one point as one of the top 140 SEOs to follow on Search Engine Journal, so that's exciting. And I'm a frequent conference speaker and often contribute to industry blogs. Haven't too much in the past few years, but like I said, now that my kiddo's getting older, I'm hoping to get back into it, and hopefully you'll see my face around a little bit more often. So yeah, like I mentioned, today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about technical SEO audits, my perspective on them, some things that I do to kind of standardize those processes for my team so that our deliverables are consistent, and then we're kind of working in the same way, how to perform those audits, certain tools that you can use, and yeah, how frequently you should be performing these types of audits. So with that, we'll get into it a little bit. And you'll notice that my theme is Halloween themed. I am a big Halloween person, so every time that I get the opportunity to, I will pretty much make any sort of conversation or presentation I'm making Halloween themed. So enjoy vintage Halloween. So first, let's talk a little bit about what technical SEO audits actually are. The first thing that you kind of want to do is understand technical SEO itself. And from my perspective, I've always defined it this way. Technical SEO is kind of the pieces of a website that influence the crawlability and connectivity to your content itself. So your content is an element, and then you have your more technical SEO pieces of the puzzle. And that's a little bit of an ambiguous way to look at it, but if you do that, which we'll talk about in a little bit, it kind of takes away some of that stress and anxiety when you get into the technical SEO world, because you can get down into a rabbit hole where things are just hyper technical, and that's great, and you should, but you also shouldn't let it scare you if you're kind of newer to this side of the SEO game, or just SEO in general. So know that as you're kind of working through things, if you're looking at it from that lens of this is the broad strokes of what a technical SEO is, then as you're learning and growing, you can evolve and make your auditing process even better. So I encourage everyone to not be scared. We all have to start at some place. So if you're new to the game, don't get too scared about the technical term itself. You can always learn those things and get better. But when I was starting out a couple of years into me being an SEO, I was starting to go to conferences, and the great Bill Hunt was doing a keynote at PubCon. And one of the things that he was talking about, and I'm paraphrasing a bit here, but he said you have to get the basics right before you can begin thinking about improving. And that really struck a chord with me. And as you'll see, I've mentioned that this happened in 2016. It's still resonating to me today, and it's kind of the methodology that I use when I'm thinking about technical SEO. And we'll get into that in just a little bit, but I really think Bill was onto something, talking about how those things that you do that set the foundation of how your website runs, those are what then elevate your other initiatives forward. So it's not something that you can ignore. So putting your best foot forward is always kind of the way that I encourage website owners to think about their site and their campaigns. So let's break this down a little bit more. Taking what Bill initially said about how to approach growing a website and the overall campaign of a site, I always like to think of the site as a tree. I'm a big person, or I'm big into analogies, so you'll notice that I kind of do that a little bit. Thinking of it as a tree has always kind of made sense for me. So let's say that technical SEO represents the roots of the tree. You want those roots to be strong, you want them to be intricate, and really establish that foundation for the tree itself, so that then as you're adding content, which I think of as the trunk of the tree, you have a steady base for that trunk to grow off of. Then the branches that come off of that trunk of the tree represent like your offsite signals or your link building. So those are the pieces that add the extra icing to the cake. You can still have a tree if it doesn't have a whole lot of branches or a lot of leaves or pumpkins in this example. But it's still there because the trunk and the roots still thrive. So when all of those things come together, they make one big website that works and is efficient and will perform well, as long as you're getting those pieces correct. So I think having that mentality kind of allows it to make sense and allows you to collaborate with other teams that influence other pieces of the puzzle that maybe you don't touch in your day-to-day work, especially if you're more technically focused. So when thinking of technical SEO, while I mentioned that it was a little ambiguous earlier in terms of the definition that I gave, here's some kind of key components that I like to think of when I'm thinking of technical SEO and where I want to at least start my journey as I'm auditing a website. So you have your crawling and indexability, your overall document structure, and how your content is laid out from an on-page perspective, the metadata that supports that content that you're feeding to the crawlers themselves, the structured data that then enhances the content of the site and the crawlability of the site, so that you have the opportunity to gain more SERP features and kind of embellish even further the experience from SERPs to your website, your architecture and linking. So how your site is laid out and then how it links between each other so that everything is efficient. You have a flow of equity that makes sense between pages and you're building relationships between those pages. Then looking into the images and the visuals that go with the site, which can then enhance your opportunities for image search, even link building initiatives or digital PR initiatives, your mobile usability, especially as kind of the world and technology has grown and we are a more mobile using society. Having your site, especially if it's something that in terms of its offerings would be something that someone would look for more towards mobile as opposed to on a desktop, then you definitely want to make sure that experience is top notch. And as indexing and crawling have become more reliant on mobile, especially with the change to the mobile first index, that mobile presence has to be absolutely stellar so that you're getting the most out of your site and the opportunities for ranking. Page speed, which also kind of goes into that mobile usability. You want the site to load fast. You want it to deliver the content quickly to users so that they absolutely understand what's happening and aren't waiting all day long, even with a bad connection. overall security of a site, especially in the kind of e-commerce world. I think this is more of something that was a focus like 6-7 years ago, when like we were starting to like really hammer home the importance of moving to like HTTPS, things like that, but it's still good to look at. And then this might come a little bit more from my background and being in the game of a large global company, but I always like to look at globalization elements, especially if the site has more of a presence in different countries or different languages that it's trying to push to its users. So these are kind of the broad categories that I look at whenever I'm establishing a technical audit process, which you'll see in a little bit. So highly recommend this kind of being your starting point for any deep dives that you're starting to do. So now that you understand technical SEO, where does the auditing come in? So technical audits review the elements that we previously mentioned and allow you to review any issues that are happening, discover ways to potentially fix those errors, and correct them in a way where the technical SEO elements of the overall site become strong and support your additional initiatives across various campaigns. And that could even be from a paid perspective. So if you have stuff on your site that's only paid, so it's not meant for any type of organic search, even though it's performing technically, you're still getting that kind of positive benefit to that paid initiative outside of your SEO initiative. So everyone wins. So here's a bit of a case study, and I made it ambiguous just to not highlight the client itself, but this is a large national client that came to Siege about halfway through last year. And as you can see, they were doing pretty well. They were mostly content focused. And when they came to us, there were a lot of areas of opportunity for improving technical SEO. So that's where we really focused our time and have pretty much right at a year now. And as you can see, once they started working with us and started kind of implementing these pieces that we were delivering to them, that traffic that they were already doing well on for like their content started doing even better because the technical foundation was there. So I'm not sharing this as a bragging opportunity, though it is, because my team is doing an incredible job with this account. But as a way to say to you and to drill home to this audience that the technical foundation is really going to be what solidifies your overall campaign and just makes things better. Apologies, I'm getting over a cold, so if I cough a couple of times, I'm sorry. So now that we understand what technical SEO is and why it's important to perform an audit, how frequently should we be looking into performing said audit and looking at these elements and trying to improve them? So I always like to establish a frequency whenever I'm working with a new site. And it kind of depends on the site itself. Do they move quickly in turning around these recommendations that come from this audit? Is it something that, and even in the vertical that they're in, it kind of depends on how quickly those changes can be picked up. A small mom and pop site that makes some changes, they might not need a regular technical SEO audit because they're a smaller site overall, but also maybe the technical piece isn't as important. It's still important, but that's not being evaluated in the algorithm as much as something else, more like those local signals. But then you have a site that's kind of that like national style e-commerce where the technical piece of the puzzle is hugely important because it's connecting things and giving an experience that users want to see and that crawlers then value. So establishing those frequencies is hugely important. And one of the things that I like to do just to establish a foundation or a place to start is looking at things at a quarterly basis. Because at some point you're just going to become too frequent. If you're doing it like once a month, maybe that doesn't make sense. So start it quarterly, see how those changes can be implemented and how quickly they turn around, and then how quickly they're recognized. And then based off of that, you can pivot and try to create a process that works in a way that makes sense for the business and the site that you are working on. So another thing to do and to keep in mind is if a site is kind of making major changes, especially like code structure or redesign or migrating from one URL to another, automatically I throw a technical SEO audit into that, because there are elements that could just go disastrously wrong if they're overlooked. A site could be set to no index on accident by like a developer or something like that. And if you don't catch that, you have to wait until a fire happens, or your executives coming to you because they don't understand why you're losing traffic and they're losing revenue from it. So being proactive in these types of situations, I think, kind of trumps the auditing frequency cadence that I previously mentioned. So this is one of those use cases where you would throw it in even if you'd done something very recently, just to make sure that everything's running smoothly post those major changes happening. So now that we have established what technical SEO is and what that audit looks like, and then how often we should do it, let's talk about how to actually get into the weeds and perform said audit. One of the first things that I like to make sure that I mention to everyone is that it's important to start any technical SEO audit or any just technical work in general with an absolutely fresh crawl of your website. It can be a day or two old, maybe, depending on how often changes are being made. But I would say the minute you're starting the work, try to get that crawl in place and get it fresh, because you want to make sure that you have the most up-to-date data to like review and look into and deep dive, or else you're just going to kind of be spinning your wheels, which you definitely don't want to do. You want to make sure that you're looking at the most accurate information possible to make the best judgments possible. Excuse me. So one of the very first things that I think everyone should do, and as I'm going through some of these, like, I guess you would call them tools or approaches to getting that data, I'll throw in the caveat that having multiple perspectives is always a good idea. So don't just rely on one tool. Make sure that you have a couple of different ones in place, because sometimes some things will catch something that something else did not. So having multiple perspectives kind of gives you the full picture, at least as best as you can. So the first thing I like to start off with is a desktop crawler. Kind of one of the gold standards of the industry is Screaming Frog. It's kind of the one everyone knows at this point, and they're continuing to improve in a way that I think makes it incredibly valuable. So that's kind of what I tend to recommend. But definitely start with a desktop crawler. Now, this can be a little resource heavy depending on the size of a site that you're working with. But there are settings that you can do within the tool itself that make it a little bit more manageable than it did a few years ago, especially with like their database functionality. So it's not, putting a huge strain on your machine, but definitely one of the things where if you're not comfortable with this type of tool, I would highly recommend spending some time in there. And it's going to be some awkward time, but learning how to configure a crawl within this type of tool so that you're getting the most out of it that you possibly can. But another thing that you can do is look into alternatives like browser crawlers. There's several tools out there that are absolutely fantastic, that are dedicated crawlers that work within your actual browser themselves. So you don't have to worry about the hardware. Typically, these types of crawlers have more limitations on how many pages you can do, and have like a monthly pricing model, things like that. So something that you can kind of consider as an alternative to those desktop crawlers. Plus, they add in the ability to have historical data based on crawls. So the more crawls that you're doing for the site or sites that you're working on, the more like you'll be able to look back and actually report on, we had this many issues in Q1, this many in Q2. Look, as we're ending the year, we have exponentially less than we saw before. So it almost adds in another layer of like reporting opportunities. So definitely something to add into your tool stack if and when possible. Now, a lot of the modern tools that we use as SEOs, things like Ahrefs or SEMrush, SEMrush, whatever you want to call them, they usually have a site auditing tool, which kind of works in a similar way to one of those browser crawlers that I previously mentioned. A little bit different. They're more focused more directly on like the issues themselves, as opposed to like getting the data on a page by page level from a crawl. not necessarily the case, but something to consider. But having these types of perspectives, in addition to the desktop or browser crawler, can be hugely valuable. Because, like I said, you're getting multiple perspectives on a similar problem, so you can deep dive them a little bit more proactively, as opposed to reactively in the future. Now, something that you don't hear too terribly much, but it should be a little bit more in the conversation of technical SEO audits, is the use of Google Search Console. So when you go into the actual performance of the sites that you have access to, most people look at, are my pages being indexed? Is that still going up or is that going down? And they move on. But within that same view, there's a plethora of opportunity for looking into why things aren't being indexed. So it's definitely something that I highly recommend people diving into a little bit more actively. Um, and you're getting the information straight from the source itself. So fixing these problems is a huge win and a huge priority, I would say. So definitely don't disregard this tool when you're performing technical SEO audits. And then even analytics itself, whatever platform you're using, definitely throw that into the mix so that you can cross-reference and see when things might have dropped off. You can figure out if something like major has changed from a technical perspective on your site. Plus, you can use the opportunity to make sure that your analytics is set up appropriately, which is always a good idea, especially as kind of the more consistent platforms that we're so used to are changing. It's a good idea to make sure that they're actually set up correctly. So now this is where it gets into the part that I'm the most passionate about. I really enjoy the technical SEO auditing process, but I really enjoy documenting said process and creating something where anyone within an organization can kind of hop in and follow those guidelines and put their own spin on it while being consistent with everyone else. So, like I previously mentioned, one of the things I've been working on since I started at Siege is creating a deliverable that's consistent across team members. And this takes inspiration from several technical SEO audit templates that you can find across the internet. If you just do a Google search for technical SEO audit templates, everyone has put out some sort of template that you can use and almost use as your own inspiration to create a jumping off point. Because while the ideas are still the same, you might approach them in a bit of a different way and be able to outline them in a way that makes more sense for your business. So this is something that I've been working on, and my team has been kind of looking at stress testing and delivering to our clients so that we as a whole work consistently, but then we can learn from each other and evolve it into something over time that makes even more sense as we go on. So highly recommend doing something yourself in this way. And if you don't want to, look into templates that others have made. We're probably even going to release this as a downloadable asset in the very near future. The plan is that I'm going to create like a blog post on the Siege Media website, and more than likely it will have this asset as something that anyone that wants to download it can. So there's tons of opportunity to kind of use somebody else and start and then put your own twist on it, almost like a painter. So like I mentioned, you want to standardize those deliverables so that things aren't so ambiguous. But at the same time, it also keeps people from just exporting issues into like a spreadsheet and handing that over to the client. If you're in any sort of SEO groups within any form of social media, it's quite often that people talk about other people providing just exports of spreadsheets and how that is just not the way to do it. And they're right. It's really tempting to just bulk export things from Screaming Frog and say, okay, here are the issues. But that's just providing you the data. You need to deep dive it a little bit further and figure out what's actually causing these issues themselves. So I always encourage everyone to dive down the rabbit hole, like really get in and figure out, and I'll give an example in a little bit, but don't just look at it at face value of, okay, it's saying that I have this many of a single issue, but actually look into what's causing the issue itself so you can recommend ways to improve it on a more efficient level. And then just overall remain mindful when you are kind of scoping out these types of projects to allow yourself time to actually do those deeper dives without going over time, especially if you're like in an agency context. It's crucial that you keep within the time constraints of the project itself. So you want to make sure that you have time to actually go down that rabbit hole without it causing any sort of budgetary issues. So just kind of a little word of caution that I like to throw out. But like I mentioned, you want to do like a root cause analysis of the issues that you're investigating so that you look at the problems from a more systemic perspective. I've established this process in a couple of different organizational situations. And in one of them, we only looked at problems that could be identified as systemic as opposed to like a page by page level. Um, so, and I'll go into this example in a little bit to be a little bit more specific, but instead of like looking at like this page over here doesn't have an H1, start looking at, okay, there are a bunch of pages that don't. What do they have in common and why? So yeah, that's my example. And it's kind of one that I default to because you see people making this kind of recommendation all the time. So I figured it kind of resonates a little bit more. Instead of looking at why H1s are missing, figure out if there's something going on in like the site's code causing H1s to not render correctly upon crawling and rendering, or maybe pages aren't following document outline best practices and they have 1,000 H1s on the page as opposed to just the one, as we're kind of all used to doing within the structure of a site. So when you're looking at those issues, you have something more than just like this page doesn't have an H1. You have hundreds of pages that don't have one. Instead, you have this problem is happening, and if we solve it here, we solve it in this many places, as opposed to just the one place. So then you get a little bit more opportunity for like executive buy-in, developer buy-in to push your project further, and then have more likely chances of your recommendations actually being implemented, which in larger organizations is really difficult to do. So having this mental approach is a great way to kind of counteract that type of mentality. And then once you're kind of creating this deliverable, depending on your client, I've always found it really helpful to create some sort of executive summary that kind of gives a very quick and easy to digest quick glance at what the issues you found were. So let's say that you are delivering this to a client that is a big organization. By having that executive summary, you can give it to your client. They can throw it out to whoever their stakeholders are so that they know exactly what you are recommending and what you have found. But then you can give more of the nitty gritty stuff over to the developer to implement and still make it easy to digest with clear direction. But you have these two different versions that satisfy the needs of the business itself, which then makes you look fantastic. So highly recommend looking into your client overall or the site that you're working on and figuring out the needs of the stakeholders themselves so that you understand the best way to deliver whatever you're delivering to them. And that just kind of goes for deliverables overall, not necessarily just technical SEO audits. So one of the first things that I like to do before like really getting into the auditing nitty gritty is kind of showing the example of how I deliver things to the client themselves, and then kind of getting their reaction to it, seeing if is this something that they like, is it something that they don't like, would they rather it be presented in a different way, so that I can customize it in a way that makes sense for them, but still allowing it to get across what I need it to. So that's kind of one of the other benefits of doing these standard deliverables. You have something that you can show as a form of consistency and saying, this is how I deliver it. Does this make sense to you? Would you like to see something else itself? So it gives them something almost tactile to look at right out of the gate. And then within that deliverable itself, you'll have noticed, if you looked at my previous slide where I showed kind of the example of the deliverable, one of the things that we show, and it's kind of consistent within deliverables across the industry, is establishing priorities and then making sure to show if whatever line item that you're looking at, if it's pass or failed, and then has it been completed based off of your recommendations. So establishing this level of priority and kind of what impact it's going to have to the overall site is a great way to make sure that those really key things that you found that are marked as high priority get completed first, just in case there's constrained development resources or, budget issues or things like that. So making sure that you have those priority levels helps you get around that a little bit. And even, kind of in the delivering this to some level of executive, having those priority levels tends to be really favored because they know that you're not just throwing everything under the sun at them. You're actually looking at it and how it's going to impact their numbers and whatever they're looking for, which more than likely is going to be some sort of revenue from organic traffic itself. So definitely something to keep in mind as you're creating these standard deliverables. Now, kind of a broad strokes approach to technical SEO audits. I hope this has given you some kind of better understanding and a way to approach it. Obviously, everyone's going to take things and make them their own in some form or fashion, which I highly encourage everyone to do. But just to kind of drive home what to take away from this, if nothing else, understand what areas you want to look at within a technical SEO audit. It's kind of generalized and the same across the board, but every site is unique. So take those kind of baselines and establish what you need to look at. Like, are internal links super important to you? Are external links super important to you? Maybe not. So maybe don't look at them depending on your business. Establish a frequency and a cadence to perform audits regularly, especially if you know that something is going to come up like a migration or a code overhaul, something like that. That's definitely a key opportunity to make those changes and perform those audits so that nothing is missed in that process. Become familiar with all the tools that you have access to and in your tool belt and how they can inform the auditing process itself. So that you feel comfortable getting in there and configuring them the right way for any sort of instance, especially let's say that you've never worked with like a JavaScript website before. Understanding how to configure a crawler to bring in that information into the crawl itself is huge. So take an opportunity to find a site that heavily utilizes JavaScript and figure out how to get that into your crawler. Understand the tools is essentially what I'm trying to say. Deep dive into systemic issues as opposed to just looking at things at a surface level. Don't just report on, you have this many of this issue happening. Look at the why and give the resolution to how to fix that so that all of those things happen in a scalable way. Create clear processes for your team so that everyone is kind of running in the same direction, but also kind of allow people to put their own like color and flavor into what they are doing through the standardized process. Don't let it be a constraint. Let it be something to start things out with and improve and iterate upon. And then don't be afraid to customize your deliverables to meet your client's needs. They're paying you as the expert, but you also have to respect that they are in a unique situation and that every site and business is different. So taking whatever you've established as a baseline and improving it in a way that meets the needs of those clients is going to be a huge win for you in the eyes of those clients themselves. So thank you so much. I mentioned the spooky Halloween theme. This is a picture of me and my daughter a few weeks back when we were doing our annual, or not annual, but weekly watch of Scooby-Doo in the mornings while we ate cereal. And we were trying on Frankenstein masks. So we both thank you for your time. And are there any questions? And if not, you can follow me on all social media platforms as @JesseSEOGeek. So thank you so much.
Oh, that was awesome. I love the Halloween mask. So, okay. Well, does anybody have any questions before I get started asking my random questions? So, I don't get to do a lot of audits. I mainly deal with small companies. I've been looking at making a spreadsheet like yours, just because audits for a sales purpose for small businesses, it helps sell so much better too. Man, that didn't come out clearly at all. But I think
I get what you're saying though. having that as a sales tool is super helpful. So definitely something I would encourage anyone to do, but also don't necessarily count out the technical challenges that could come from a small site. I worked on a site that was Austin only, um, so bigish city, but still kind of in the grand scheme of things a small site. Um, and we saw that one day all of us they had like instant answers and all sorts of rich snippets, things like that, and that just tanked out of nowhere. We're like, what is going on? And basically what we found out, because that site was HTTP before the big push for HTTPS, that our server had the secure port open when it shouldn't have, so Google prioritized that crawling. When it did, it didn't see the site, and in turn indexed a site that wasn't there, and then devalued everything that was on that server. So pretty big
Ouch.
technical issue that if we would have known that was happening, we could have mitigated. Now, once we fixed it, everything came back, and then we pushed it all to HTTPS, and all was good. We were fine, but definitely it's
Yeah.
small site, but big issues. So definitely don't
Okay.
count it out.
Tim said that was great. He had no questions from him.
Thank you.
So I guess I've got a friend. I'm sure most people know him, named Jeremy Vest. He's working on a chat GPT for interviewing people like this. So he gave me access it to
I like
test
it.
it out.
I like it. Let's test it.
And man, it was like all you had to do is provide your name
Mm-hmm.
and it started spitting out all sorts of stuff about you.
Oh, this is exciting. I'm
So
super into this.
you didn't mention this at all, but apparently you were in graphic design.
I went to school for it.
So how did your background in graphic design shape your approach in SEO?
That's actually an incredibly interesting conversation. So I went to school for graphic design, moved out to Austin, was looking for graphic design jobs. Um, Incredibly competitive market, so that didn't end up working out. But the first company that I ended up working for 10 years ago hired me on and said, we'll teach you a little bit of everything with the goal of eventually you'll move into our design department. So I started working in like PPC, SEO for our more general client list. And then as we started to grow a little bit, it was kind of put out as, okay, this is the opportunity. If you want to move to design, cool. Or would you like to go somewhere else? So I said, I kind of like SEO. So I think I'm going to stick with that, especially because working in a creative art focused sort of thing could then make me not like art. And I didn't want that, but I still got to use my like design brain, because usability and just user experience as a whole became such an important piece of the SEO puzzle, like right around the time that I was starting. So I still got to think about things that way. So that's an
Yeah.
incredibly long-winded way of saying my design background gave me insights into how to think like a user, so that I didn't get too stuck in the robot crawler side of things as I'm learning SEO. So I did a lot of like CRO and usability auditing at the very early stages of my career, and it's something that we're starting to do a lot now. The UX team over at Siege actually reports into me, which they're separate from our design team. They're more of like the UX web people, so they're not doing so much of the graphic stuff, more layout type stuff. So we collaborate very, very actively, and because of that, we have the opportunity to bring those sorts of ideas and recommendations to our clients, which I think is a huge win. And everyone should do that. I think SEOs and designers should become like two peas in a pod, just like SEO and PPC should be. SEO and design
Yeah.
absolutely should be.
Yeah, I've seen the more UX an SEO person knows, normally the better off they do in the end.
For sure. And the more SEO a designer knows, the more dangerous they become. And it's fantastic. I know a couple of
Yeah.
designers that are like actually really decent SEOs, and they're incredibly valuable people to an organization.
Yeah. All right. So, next question. What is the most pivotal moment in your career that set you on the path to becoming a global SEO strategist for IBM?
Um,
or we can do Siege.
That's an interesting question in itself. I think getting out into like the conference space and contributing to the industry was a huge part of that, because my name had some recognition to it. So even though I wasn't as experienced necessarily in the given space, because people knew that I at least somewhat knew what I was talking about, it was easier to take a chance on me moving into that sort of place. And to be 100% transparent, I think the pivotal role of me moving into a company like IBM came from attempting the first time and not getting it the first time. So then it made me kind of look at, well, what do I need to work on if this opportunity pops up again? I then spent the next year doing so. And just by chance, almost exactly a year later, opportunity popped up and there we go. It kind of happened. So,
Wow, that's
yeah.
awesome. All right, so given the current state, the wow, given the constant evolution, I told you this was going to be exciting with me on here. So, given the constant evolution of the search algorithms, what are the top 3 trends in SEO business that businesses should be paying attention to for the rest of this year?
I would say definitely it's an interesting thing, and this is kind of how I've approached SEO over the last 10 years. While it's changing all the time, it's also not changing a whole lot. So there are things that are changing, but the other pieces of it are staying relatively consistent. So making sure that your site is technically sound and then has content to support whatever area or vertical that you're working in, those two things alone, you've already got a huge piece of the puzzle solved for. Um, and then, and when I say that, I mean like you create the content and you connect it together in a way to where you're building the relationships between the pages where they can be crawled efficiently, siphon equity from each other so that they're building that kind of authority and importance, but then also build those topical relationships between each other. By doing that alone, you've got most of the kind of thought covered. Then it's about getting it in front of people, and that could be through paid initiatives, link acquisition initiatives, digital PR, whatever you want to call it. Creating something that's valuable enough to where people talk about it, and then it comes back to you. That really kind of rounds out what you should be looking at. So I mean, while there's a lot of conversations around AI and things like that in the industry, that's in my mind a tool. It's a tool to kind of put those other things forward. It's the bark of the tree. If you
Yeah.
want to deep
Oh yeah.
dive that analogy even further.
Yeah. So with all the tools, I know you talked about Screaming Frog and some AI tools. Um, what other go-to tools do you have, and have they evolved over the years?
They definitely have. So like Screaming Frog, Lumar, which I believe that's their name now, which used to be Deep Crawl. That's a fantastic one. Um, a Rank Tracker. Um, I mean, there's a bunch of them, and they keep changing and getting better. Um, so basically, whatever an organization is willing to offer me as in terms of a tool, I'm all for it. There's a couple that I think are incredibly interesting that people don't necessarily talk about too terribly much, and they're incredibly granular. So there's one, I believe. Let's see, it's just called Web Developer. It's a little purple cogwheel. It's an extension within Chrome, but basically, what you can do with that um, is go onto a site, and there's tons of different tools and features that it does. Um, so one thing that I like to do when I'm looking at a page and things look a little funky, you can just click a button and click Document Outline, and it'll give you every heading that page uses. So you can see if it's following those best practices. So when I'm seeing that, there's multiple H1s or, whatever through one of my crawlers, I can go into a few of those use cases and start figuring out what might be happening. Yes, that's the one. It also lets you, like block JavaScript or block CSS or things like that. So then you can see, if you take away one of those elements, what is my site going to look like? So then that if those things break, maybe you don't need to rely on those so much. So that's another fantastic one. Mike's got a bunch of really good recommendations in the chat, so definitely hit those up. But I mean, it's constantly evolving, and you have kind of your standards and go-tos, but then see if you can find something new that works and solves a different problem. I think I just changed up my redirect path tool not too long ago, and then I found one recently that shows all the hreflang tags on a page, that I found super helpful in a very specific use case, but then it's been helpful in some other ones. So I mean, it's just constantly changing.
Sweet. All right, so let's go back a little bit. You just barely touched on this, but you've been a judge for several SEO awards. What do you look for in an award-winning SEO campaign?
That's a really good question, and one of the funniest things in terms of answers, and it might sound really strange, just fill out the form correctly. That in itself is a huge win. You would be shocked at how many people just simply do not fill out the form correctly. But all jokes aside, and I mean, that's still incredibly important, but the real answer to that question, and I think the thing that can set people apart, and this actually goes for any situation, it's tempting to say, oh, I grew, organic traffic X percentage over whatever amount of time. That's great. That means nothing to me. What you should say is, I went from this much to this much, and give as specific number as you can, which is tough to do. There's NDAs and stuff like that out there where you can't share data, so you might need to make it a little ambiguous or something like that. But by just simply doing something like that, and showing that data, and then showing the data to actually back it up, as opposed to just a simple screenshot or something like that, that is a huge game changer in terms of award judging. Because when I have that, I can actually validate what your claims are, and feel good about pushing you forward as a potential winner of that type of situation. So yeah, that's probably my number one advice.
Okay.
And fill the form out the right way.
Yeah. That's you would think that'd be easy to do, but
You would think.
So as a senior director,
Mm-hmm.
how do you cultivate a team just to stay ahead in the industry trends and deliver great solutions?
Yeah, that's a real challenge in itself, but it really depends on the team. Luckily, I'm in a situation where I have a team of people that are insanely hungry to learn. There's probably zero ego on my team whatsoever. If someone doesn't know something, no one will say, oh, I know that, I'm better than you. It's totally oh, well, I can help you. Let me show you how to do that. And then we all become better. So it's almost like a group initiative to make all of us better constantly, which is fantastic and not something that you see all the time. So we're in a situation where we're constantly collaborating on the things that we want to learn from each other, to establish internal trainings that we can provide not only to ourselves as a team, but also to the rest of the company overall, so that everyone then evolves. So by encouraging folks to look at the areas where they're the strongest, and then look at the areas where they're the weakest, and figure out how to fill in those gaps across the board, everyone is leveling each other up, and everyone feels good about being, particularly good in one space, and being able to teach that. So not, you know, I don't want to like toot my own horn and say this, but like, not having an ego and saying that I know everything, but instead facilitating how to get the knowledge in the right place from somebody, and giving them that platform to share that knowledge. They then become better at that thing. And then the other people become better because that was shared to them. So always encouraging them to share, and, read things and share things with each other, and just kind of generally talk about stuff. That's a huge win overall.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So I can see that because even in my short corporate stint that I had, there was not really any sharing. It's, oh, I'll fix that for you. Don't worry about it.
Yeah,
Not, well, here, let me show you how to do it real quick. And like me, I'd rather show you how to do it. So next time you don't have to come to me, you can just fix the problem and we all move along.
for sure.
So
That was one of the things that I was doing towards the end of my time over at IBM, as I was building out an internal like education platform within their kind of internal wiki that they have, and putting up a bunch of like content of like past trainings that we did, or even creating new trainings that solve specific problems, so that there was one place to find them as opposed to just being lost in the ether of whatever cloud platform that we were hosting all of these things in. um, and by doing that, more people, even outside of the SEO organization or even the immediate organization that SEO sat in, could look into these things and become better overall and figure out ways to utilize this in whatever their kind of KPIs were. And for a long time, so I've been away from IBM for close to 6 months now, something like that. I'd still get messages on LinkedIn relatively regularly of people that were like, "Hey, I didn't know that you made this while you worked here. This is really valuable. Thanks for doing this." So I think
wow.
I think creating like ubiquity in SEO knowledge makes the entire organization better. That's something my really good friend Keith Good, who worked at IBM with me for a while, he preached that for many years, and I kind of took that to heart and tried to do the exact same thing, and I still think it's the way to go.
Yeah, I think it's great too. How do you feel with all the AI stuff coming? How do you think that's going to, will like affect SEO? Like, because now, like, I've got friends that have put in help documents in ChatGPT and created them based on one product, and then they can just ask it and it spits out the answers and walkthroughs on how to do things. So, how do you feel AI is going to affect our industry over the next couple of years?
I think as it's gotten better, there's more opportunity for it to be a helpful tool to utilize within our work. I've done some occasional experiments, and for full transparency, I'm having to play a little bit of catch up because we, working at a company that has one of the biggest AI platforms in the world, weren't really allowed to do too much playing around with some of the other competition out there. So, uh, like I said, playing a little bit of catch up as we speak, but we have an internal AI committee that's constantly looking at kind of AI news and ways to better utilize it across all of our work. So I'm seeing those things, and it's really interesting. I think I think we're going to hit a point where it's overutilized, and we might be getting there, we might not be, um, and it's going to cause a need to devalue it in some way or regulate it in some way. I know that's a really ambiguous and not really answering your question necessarily, but I think the more people think of it as a tool and not a way to replace the work itself, I think it will become more effective and efficient. Um, but at the same time, one thing that I want to caution everything about, and it's a perspective that you don't hear many people kind of chat about unless you've been in that like super corporate world. Um, Really large businesses have caution towards AI, especially putting their data into it. So, if they see that a tool that is trying to go through procurement heavily utilizes AI, they're going to nix it immediately and deny it. Um, so we ran into that at a couple of times when we were trying to get a new tool, just through the simple purchasing process. And it's something that we'd had for years, but now all of a sudden they're promoting that they use AI to do this or this, and it's like, whoa, we can't put our information in there. So then that adds this new layer of difficulty to get it through that process, which is already a tough process itself. So very indirectly to say, be careful if you're developing a tool or adding AI into a tool that you're trying to shop around and getting large clients on, because really large clients might have some pause. when it comes to there being AI involved. So just
Yeah, I didn't think
a
about that side of it at all.
little unsolicited thought that I've had in my head for the last year or so.
So, all right. Well, outside of SEO, I know you like horror,
I do.
and I'm assuming by the guitars you like music.
I do.
So how does that fall into your personal life, like work-life balance? I know you got a little one,
I do.
so
Um,
I remember having kids. Work-life balance is a little rough.
it, it's all about how you approach it, and maybe that comes from having a kiddo 2 weeks into the lockdown of pandemic. Like, she was literally born like 2 weeks into it, so I had a lot of opportunity to kind of figure out what that work life balance looked like. And my kiddo's super cool, so it's really easy to just hang out with her. Um, but I would say that work life balance has become an even more important part of my life, as I'm in the second half of my decade long career. Very early on, it used to be one of those I'd clock out from work, go get dinner, and then spend the rest of the night reading some sort of SEO or business book or something like that. And that was cool. That really like elevated me as a person, especially as I was getting into like leadership roles and stuff. So it was helpful. But after a certain amount of time, you just start getting burnt out, and then you live burnt out. So I started kind of taking a pause. And when I moved into like the in-house world, I determined that I was going to move more into a place where my work was what I did during the day, and then my life was what defined me. So that's been kind of a big mission statement of mine over the last four or so years. And then the kiddo just absolutely magnified that initiative. And I joke that SEO, being an SEO or an SEO director, is my second job. Dad is my first job, always. So I'm a big proponent of work life balance. So pretty much after work, I'm taking care of her, hanging out with her, and then as soon as she's in bed, go watch a movie or something like that, and try to come into the next day with a fresh brain. And that doesn't work for everybody, unfortunately. It'd be nice if it did, but I'm lucky to be in a situation where that works for me, and it's really nice.
Awesome. All right. So
Even
one
though the
last.
things that I really like are incredibly chaotic and probably freak out other people, but that's okay.
It is what it is.
Agreed.
All right. Last question. Looking back on your career, what do you hope your legacy in the SEO industry will be?
I've actually thought about that a lot. And it's kind of the same just in general of my life. I'm not one of those people that think that I'm gonna like have a legacy or really hope to have a legacy, other than just I hope that my kid ends up being cool, and once I'm gone, she still remains super cool. Um, so that's all I really care about. But at the end of the day, if when I leave this planet, people think of me as a genuinely nice person that helped them in some way, that's what I want it to be. So if I help somebody learn something about SEO and it made their career better, great. I did my job in my mind on this planet. So that's all I'm really ever looking to do. Uh, yeah,
Awesome.
yeah.
Sweet. Well, if there's any other questions for Jesse, we'll take them real quick. If not, we're going to end this. It's been exciting.
Yeah,
I
it's
guess
been great.
I guess one more question.
Sure.
Who's been your biggest mentor for SEO?
Mentor, or just in terms of someone that I look up to? I can answer both,
Yeah, let's
possibly.
go with both.
Okay, so going with both. If you see me around at conferences at all, and the two of us are in the same place, we're pretty much hanging out together, even though we live in the same city. We pretty much see each other at conferences outside of the same city. So I would say Keith Good has been probably one of my biggest mentors over my career. I've known him pretty much the entire time. And even though we've worked in different spaces for the most part, seeing how he approaches his work and his overall brand has been really inspiring to me. And just having him as a friend overall is fantastic. And so I've always kind of thought of him as a mentor in the respect of I've learned a lot from him and how he's approached different scenarios that he's worked in. So that would be the mentor side of the question. In terms of someone that I've looked up to consistently and feel like I've like grown the most from, hands down, Will Reynolds. I think he's one of the absolute smartest people in the business and is just an overall really cool guy. Genuinely nice, and he's given me the time of day several times. We've talked a bunch at conferences and over the internet over the last 10 years or so. So we kind of have a somewhat familiarity with each other. But I think he's just so incredibly smart and thinks of things in such a different way and so outside of the box that it then encourages like me and other people to do the same. So yeah, I think the more people we have like that out in the world, the better we'll all be and the more we'll learn.
Awesome. All right. Well, I guess that's going to be it for us. Thank
Sounds
you
good.
for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun.
I've really enjoyed it. So,
Yeah, me too, man.
all right, everybody, have a good night.